Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going, and as I like to remind you each and every day, it expands our base. The abdication of a president. No surprise, really. Those of you who have listened to me on this podcast, Around the Political World with John Rothman, have known and clearly understood that my view was that Joe Biden would not stand as a candidate. And I have said repeatedly that I believe that Kamala Harris would be the Democratic nominee for president. I don't think it took a prophet to understand that. It was simply pragmatic. Joe Biden was clearly not up to another 4 years as president. I'm going to talk a lot about what goes on in this campaign, but I want to begin today with a history lesson. The abdication of a president. We have examples in history, just in the 20th century, if I can focus there, because I think it's so important. There was Calvin Coolidge, who was a cinch for re-election in 1928. But Calvin Coolidge made a strategic decision, and in August of 1927, he put out a little slip of paper which said, "I do not choose to run in 1928. And that was the end of the Coolidge presidency. No one forced him out. He made the decision himself. Whatever the reasons, whatever the motivations, a lot of speculation, Coolidge opened the way for Herbert Hoover to become the president of the United States. And then there was Harry Truman. He had won a stunning re-election victory in 1948. And I should say, when I say re-election, I really mean an election victory. Because remember, he succeeded Franklin Roosevelt in 1945 on April 12th. So for Harry Truman, he had served essentially 2 terms, 8 years. And so at a Jefferson-Jackson Day dinner in 1952, Harry Truman announced he would not run for president in 1952. And that opened the door for Adlai E. Stevenson, who became the Democratic nominee not only in 1952, but in 1956. And then, of course, there was Lyndon Johnson, who in 1968 seemed a sure bet for re-election. Oh, he had the war in Vietnam to deal with, and he had violence in the United States to deal with. But he was the guy who it appeared would be elected for another term. And then on March 31st, 1968, in a stunning announcement, Lyndon Johnson said that he would not seek the nomination of the Democratic Party. He would not run for re-election to be our president. He stepped out, and the nation was stunned. And the man who took over as the nominee of the Democratic Party in 1968 was none other than Hubert H. Humphrey, who had been Vice President of the United States. And of course, the other act of abdication in the 20th century was Richard Nixon, who on the night of August 8th, 1974, announced that he would resign the presidency, not because he wanted to, but because, well, he had to. And so we have examples of this kind of abdication of power. It's not easy. Walking away from the presidency of the United States is not an easy thing to do. And now, Joe Biden. There was no question in my mind that after the debate performance, Joe Biden would have to step out. I hated to say it because, as I have told you on numerous occasions, I like Joe Biden. I think he's been a very good president, and frankly, I was prepared to support him again. But understand, and I said this in a previous podcast, that there was no question that if Joe Biden ran, what we'd really be doing is voting for Kamala Harris for president. Because frankly, I didn't think Joe Biden could make it through 4 more years. And so the die is cast. And now the question is, what will happen? I made the absolute statement that if Joe Biden withdrew, Kamala Harris would be the Democratic nominee for president, that there would be no substantial opposition, if any opposition at all. And that has proven to be true. The Democratic Party cannot repudiate someone who is the sitting vice president, who has been at the right hand of Joe Biden, and who I would point out to you is the first woman vice president, an African American and Asian, and who has spoken clearly about her role as vice president, a critical role. She has been at Joe Biden's side. Some will say, well, doesn't this mean that the Republicans will run against the Biden-Harris administration? And the answer is yes. They would have done it under either condition. But the fascinating thing is that Kamala Harris is up to running. She's young, she's dynamic, she has experience, and let's remind everybody, District Attorney of San Francisco, Attorney General of California, United States Senator, and Vice President of the United States. It's an impressive list of accomplishments. Not only that, she was reelected to each office that she ran for, and that is a testimony to her staying power. Kamala Harris will be a formidable contender in this race for president. If I were Donald Trump, I'd be worried. And frankly, he is worried. Listen to his responses. Listen to the ads that his campaign is already preparing. And listen to his own words. I will tell you what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for Kamala Harris to go into a direct head-to-head debate with Donald Trump. Remember, she is a prosecutor. She is an experienced prosecutor. And if I were Donald Trump, I would not be happy about confronting Kamala Harris. The Democratic Party now has a few months, not long, but a few months, in order to prepare a campaign to propel Kamala Harris to the White House. And let me point out to you, this is a nation which doesn't just vote for, it votes against. I've told you that before, and I'll tell you that again. The opposition to Donald Trump is overwhelming, and Kamala Harris will be the rallying cry for Democrats and those who oppose Donald Trump. I would never underestimate the power of Donald Trump in terms of his popularity with his base. The question now will be, will the American people accept Kamala Harris as the leader of the Democratic Party and the next president of the United States? The next 4 months are going to be fascinating. They will be filled with drama. And yes, I'm looking forward to talking with you about it right here on Around the Political World with John Rothman. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand. Want to remind you that you can interact with me on LinkedIn and on Facebook. Also want to extend my deep appreciation to the wonderful producer of this podcast, Gogo Zoger. Thanks, Gogo. All right, that's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow. Who knows what will happen by then? I am John Rothman, and you are listening to Around the Political World with John Rothman.